Okay, students, this is going to be super short because I didn't realize there was only a few slides left on this. But it's good that I broke it up. So I want to pick up with the Siege of Vicksburg. Um, so this is where Grant is moving south on the Mississippi River, and this is about midway down the state of Mississippi. It'd be nice if I'd included a map on here, but so the very day that Lee retreated from Gettysburg, which is July 4th, Grant was taking over Vicksburg. Now, that was the day that Vicksburg surrendered, but not the day that Grant started working on Vicksburg. If you'll notice down on the third bullet point, it was in April that Grant got to Vicksburg. He had twice as many men, more than twice as many men, as the Confederate troops, which were under the command of a man named by the name of Pemberton, which was not in the book, but I happen to know that because I lived in Vicksburg. Vicksburg sits up on a hill that overlooks the Mississippi River, high up on a hill, which made it a great place to put cannons like this right here. And so the Confederates had cannons staged up on these hills pointing down at the Mississippi River, which made it a great place for them to kind of watch over the Mississippi River. But so that's why the Union had to have it. They had to take that city of Vicksburg so that they could control the Mississippi River and take it away from the Confederates. So Grant, though, by this time is aware that people are criticizing him for the loss of troops. Now, it doesn't change the way he thinks or the way he knows he has to behave, but he's going to be a little bit more cautious at this point, and Lincoln has not yet put him in charge of all of the army. And so he decides he's going to, instead of just attack the city, he can just lay siege to the city. And laying siege to the city means he's going to simply surround it with his men on the land side and just start hitting it with cannons and do other things that I'll describe in just a second. And then on the river, he is counting on his friends on the river. Northern gunboats are going to come up the river and start shelling it from the river with cannons from the river. So between him and the Navy, it worked out quite well. So in April, he starts preventing food supplies from getting into the city of Vicksburg. I want you to look at this little picture here. It's hard to tell, but all of these little places that look like holes, these little places are where people dug holes into the sides of the hills and lived because their houses had been bombed out with cannon shells. Now, I know a lot about this because I lived in this little city for 2.5 years, and so I know a lot about the history of it, more about the history of it than what's in your textbook. So I'm going to elaborate a little bit because it makes it more interesting. All right, so like I said, Union gunships and ironclads helped out by shelling the city from the river, which helped Grant out quite a bit. And also, during this fight, now obviously the Confederates are fighting back, the troops that are in the city, but people live in the city too, men and women and children, and those are the people that dug into the side of the hills. Grant would put the rotting bodies of his dead animals and even sometimes dead men into the little streams that would feed the water supply to the city of Vicksburg. So after a while, it wasn't just a question of food not getting into the city. After a while, it was a question of there was no clean water getting into the city except what they could get from rain, because they can't get down to the Mississippi River because of the gunboats. And all of the streams that are coming into the river are polluted with, bad stuff, and they know it. So they just eventually had to give up because they were literally being starved out, and they had to give up. So shortly after Vicksburg surrendered, Grant moves on down the river to all the other little cities that are on down the river. Port Gibson, Port Hudson, Natchez, Mississippi, all of those little cities. He rolls through every single one of them. And they don't really put up much resistance. Okay, he's got quite the reputation by now, and so they really probably mostly just give up without much of a fight. I have this picture here because in class I talked to you about how at Vicksburg, Mississippi, they have pulled up an old ironclad from the bottom of the Mississippi River from a battle that they had there, and have restored it, and they have it outside, and you can go see it. And that's a picture of what it looks like there. It's really kind of cool. If ever you go to Vicksburg, Mississippi, you should take it in. That's my travel advertisement for Vicksburg. All right. One of the most important speeches that President Lincoln ever gave was the Gettysburg Address. People often confuse it with his inauguration speeches, which were way, of course, much longer. Inauguration speeches usually last, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes, sometimes longer than that, even depending on the president. But the Gettysburg Address is the one that is on the Lincoln Monument behind his statue. As you can see, I've got a picture of it down here at the bottom. The Gettysburg Address only lasted a couple minutes, and it was given at the Gettysburg battlefield. There were so many men killed there that instead of trying to move all of those bodies and put them somewhere else, they kept them there and just buried them and put crosses there to commemorate them. And it's the Gettysburg Battlefield Cemetery, Soldiers National Cemetery. You see it at the top. And Lincoln went there to commemorate it as a cemetery. He was the last speaker there. And the guy that spoke in front of him, Edward Everett, who no one knows who he is, nor do we care who he is, he spoke for 2 hours. Lincoln spoke for 2 minutes, and this is one of the most recognized speeches on the planet. And in the speech, Lincoln talks about how our country was founded and how now it's their turn, his generation's turn, to preserve democracy for the rest of time. And that's what the fight for the Civil War is all about.